Chapter 1. Chance. "Oh my goodness, it is so good to have you home." His mother enveloped him in a hug so tight that he could feel the pearls on her necklace digging into his shoulder. "I'm not staying here, Mom. I'm going to find my own place." Chance wondered if coming back here had been a mistake. After his injury, he had spent months at his last stateside base in North Carolina, working a boring desk job and going through rehab. Though he'd hoped he would be able to return to combat once he completed rehab, the military had decided that was no longer possible. And so, instead of re-enlisting for another 4 years, Chance had opted to walk away from his military career. Then, because he knew few people in the area and had no desire to stay where his failures would haunt him, he had made the excruciatingly difficult decision to return home. At least in courage, he'd told himself, he had his mother and perhaps a few old friends, though he hadn't kept up with many of them. He also couldn't deny there was a small piece of him that hoped Merribeth would still be there and he could convince her to give him another shot. Seeing his friends in his unit make marriage work even through long deployments and facing his own mortality had certainly changed his view on love. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was worth it.
"I know,"
she said, finally releasing him,
"but I haven't seen you in ages."
She stepped back, but kept her hands on his shoulders.
"Let me get a good look at you."
He felt more like an item at a market that she was considering purchasing than her son, as she scanned him from head to toe. But he supposed he couldn't blame her. It had been years since he'd been home. He'd called the first few Christmases after enlisting, but the last one had been spent halfway across the world, and he just hadn't been able to muster the energy to deal with all the hoops he would have to jump through to make a long-distance call.
"You're as handsome as ever, though you could use a haircut."
He chuckled slightly at that. For 8 years, he'd worn his hair in military regulation. High and tight was the common term used. But since his return to civilianism, it hadn't been high on his list. Perhaps it was time for a trim. "Okay, Mom, I'll add that to the list. But finding a place to live and a job need to come first." Her eyes lit up, and she clasped her hands together.
"Oh, speaking of that, I've been seeing this very nice man lately, and he happens to run the resort in town. He's a transplant from Texas and has a personality as big as the state. I think you'll really like him. Anyway, he told me the other night that he was looking for a manager."
Chance shook his head. The last thing he needed was his mother setting up a job for him, especially with her new boyfriend. "I can find my own job."
"I'm sure you can, but I've already set up the interview. I didn't get the job for you, just an interview. The rest is up to you."
She crossed her arms and fixed him with a stare that said the topic was not up for discussion. Chance could think of nothing more embarrassing than attending an interview his mother set up for him, but he had no other leads in town currently. Refusing felt like looking a gift horse in the mouth. "Fine, I'll interview with him. Now, did you happen to find some properties for rent?" His mother was a realtor and an interior designer, and though it pained him, he had asked her to help him find a place in town because living with her was out of the question.
"Of course I did. I have several places lined up to show you. Are you ready?"
Chance wasn't sure he was ready to be back in courage or to have his overbearing mother back in his life, but he was sure he was ready to find his own place. Butch Myers was exactly as his mother had described him. Chance would have guessed he was from Texas, even if his mother hadn't droned on about it as she showed him houses. The man wore a large cowboy hat, a bolo tie, and a button-down shirt. "You must be Chance," the man said, standing and extending his hand. His voice still held the twang of a Texas drawl, and Chance wondered briefly what had brought him to Colorado. "Yes, sir. Thank you for meeting with me." He made sure to keep his grip firm as he shook the man's hand.
Well, I'm sure you know Vivian is a hard woman to say no to. Besides, I looked at your resume, and being a veteran myself, I've been wanting to hire more of them. Lord knows the government doesn't always look out for us, even after all we gave. Am I right?
Chance hadn't been a veteran long enough to know that answer for himself, but he'd heard complaints from older men while receiving rehab. According to them, the VA wasn't always the best at finding veterans jobs or helping them out in times of need, though Chance preferred to think that they tried. Still, service members helping each other out was definitely something he could get behind.
Yes, sir.
Butch pointed to one of the brown leather chairs facing his massive desk.
Sit. Now, I know about military training, but what sort of management experience do you have?
Nothing with anything this large, to be honest, sir. But I did spend many winters working in my father's store. He used to own one of the ski rental shops downtown before he and my mother divorced. That shop had been the bane of Chance's existence growing up. During the summers, it hadn't been so bad, but when the first snow fell and the tourists began flooding Courage, his father had insisted he help out in the store as soon as school let out for the day.
Homework can wait,
he'd always said, when Chance would protest. Weekends and free time had waited too, until the mountain closed for the season. Butch nodded and stroked his meaty chin.
Bet he had you running it half the time, didn't he?
Chance chuckled. That was the understatement of the century. At one point, his father had been sure he would take over running the shop, and so he'd made sure Chance knew every in and out of running it.
Yes, sir, he did. He taught me how to order inventory, position the items for maximum purchase power, and, of course, how to deal with employees.
A large grin spread across Butch's face.
Well, it sounds to me like he, along with the military, taught you everything you'll need for this position. What do you say we make it official?
Chance wanted to say yes, though this was not exactly what he'd trained for. He thought the position would challenge him enough, but one tiny detail kept his excitement in check.
That sounds great, and I would love to work for you, but I have to know. You're not offering me the job simply because you're seeing my mother, are you?
A loud, hearty laugh bellowed from Butch's lips.
Chance, your mother is a force to be reckoned with, to be sure, but she does not run my resort or my decisions. In that case, sir, when can I start?